The rain had finally stopped. It left behind that heavy, wet silence that clings to the pavement. The kind of silence that amplifies every sound. Inside my house, the air smelled of expensive lilies and floor wax. Perfection. That was the only word allowed in my home today. Tomorrow, my daughter, Sarah, was walking down the aisle. My little girl. The girl I had raised on coupon clippings and sheer willpower. She was marrying into a family that had never known a day of hunger in their lives, and I had made sure of it. I tightened the silk belt of my robe. I felt the cold porcelain of my coffee cup against my palm. I walked to the front door. I wanted one moment. Just one moment to stand on my porch and look at the manicured lawn. To look at the empire I had built from the ashes of my past. I unlocked the heavy oak door. It swung open without a sound. I took a deep breath of the morning air. And then I choked. The smell hit me before I saw him. It was a thick, sour stench. Old sweat, damp wool, and something else. Something sweet and rotting, like fruit left too long in the sun. I looked down. My stomach turned over. There was a pile of rags curled up in the corner of my porch, right next to the potted hydrangeas I had watered yesterday. A man, a homeless man, sleeping on my property. On the morning of my daughter's wedding rehearsal, the rage was instant. It wasn't just annoyance. It was a hot white flash of protectiveness. I had spent 20 years keeping filth away from this life. I had spent 20 years scrubbing the poverty off our skin. And now, here it was, curled up on my doorstep like a bad omen. I didn't feel pity. I felt violated. I stepped closer. My expensive slippers made no sound on the wood. I looked at the boots sticking out from the coat. The leather was cracked open. I could see the gray, bruised skin of his ankle through the hole. Disgusting, hey? My voice was sharp. It cut through the morning silence like a whip. The pile of rags didn't move. I stepped closer. I could hear his breathing. It was a wet, rattling sound, like his lungs were filled with gravel. "Get up," I shouted. "You cannot be here. Not today." Nothing. The fear started to creep in then. What if he was dead? What if my daughter walked out here in her bridal silk and found a corpse? No, I wouldn't allow it. I reached out with my foot. I nudged the sole of his boot, hard. I said, "Get up, or I am calling the police." The figure stirred. It was a slow, painful movement, like an old machine trying to start in the cold. A groan escaped from under the hood of the coat. It was a sound of pure exhaustion. A hand reached out to grip the porch railing. The hand was terrifying. The fingers were black with grime. The nails were long and yellow. But the skin was so thin I could see the bones underneath. He pulled himself up. He didn't look at me. He kept his head down, hidden by the hood. He seemed ashamed. Good. He should be ashamed. He began to gather his things. A plastic bag filled with crushed cans. A piece of cardboard damp from the rain. He moved with a terrible slowness. Every joint popped. Every step seemed to cost him something. "Faster," I hissed. "My guests will be here in an hour. I want you gone." He nodded. A weak, jerky nod. He didn't speak. He didn't ask for money. He didn't beg for food. He just turned his back to me and started to limp toward the stairs. The limp was severe. His left leg dragged behind him as if it didn't belong to his body. I watched him go. My heart was pounding against my ribs. I took a sip of my coffee to calm my nerves. But the coffee tasted bitter. I just wanted him off my land. I wanted the smell of him gone. I wanted to go back to being the respected matriarch. The woman who had one. He reached the bottom of the stairs. The clouds above us shifted. For the first time that morning, a beam of sunlight broke through the gray. It was a sharp, bright ray. It hit the wet pavement. And it hit him. The man stumbled on the last step. His hood fell back. Just for a second. Just an inch. But the light caught the side of his neck. And I froze. The coffee cup slipped from my fingers. It hit the porch. It shattered into 1,000 white pieces. But I didn't hear the crash. The world had gone silent. All I could see was that neck. There was a scar. It wasn't a normal scar. It wasn't a straight line from a knife. It wasn't a jagged tear from a fall. It was a burn. A distinct raised keloid scar. In the shape of a star. My breath trapped in my throat. My vision blurred. I knew that scar. I knew exactly how it felt under my fingertips. I knew exactly what room we were in when it happened. I knew the smell of the burning skin. I knew the scream that followed it 20 years ago. The kitchen of a cramped apartment. The air thick with the smell of cheap pasta and cigarette smoke. We were screaming. We were always screaming back then. About money. About the baby. About the debts that were drowning us. He had turned away from me. He had tried to walk out the door. And in my blind, youthful rage, I had thrown the first thing my hand could find. A heavy metal hair curler. Fresh off the heat. It had hit him on the neck. The metal seared into his skin. He had fallen to his knees. He didn't hit me back. He never hit me back. He just looked at me with eyes full of a sadness so deep it terrified me. That was the last night I saw him. The next morning, the bank accounts were empty. The crib was empty, and he was gone. I stood there on my porch, my expensive robe fluttering in the wind, the shattered porcelain at my feet. I stared at the back of the homeless man. The man I had just kicked like a dog. The man I had cursed. The man I had hated every single day for 2 decades. The man I told my daughter was dead. It couldn't be. It was impossible. Elias was a monster. Elias was a thief. Elias was the man who stole our future to go live on a beach somewhere. He wasn't this broken thing. He wasn't this pile of rags dragging a dead leg. Elias? The name came out of my mouth before I could stop it. It was barely a whisper, a ghost of a word. But he heard it. The man stopped. His shoulders stiffened. He didn't turn around. He stood perfectly still in the driveway. The wind blew his coat around his thin legs. I saw his hand gripping the plastic bag. His knuckles turned white. He was shaking. He wasn't shaking from the cold. He was shaking from fear. I took a step down the stairs. My glass slippers crunched on the gravel. "Turn around," I commanded. My voice was shaking now, too. "Let me see your face." He lowered his head. He tried to pull the hood back up. He tried to take another step away from me, to run, but he was too weak to run. I ran down the stairs. I forgot my dignity. I forgot the neighbors. I forgot the wedding. I ran across the wet grass and grabbed his arm. The fabric of his coat was damp and greasy, but underneath, the arm was thin, like a twig. I pulled him around. "Look at me," I screamed. He raised his head, and the world ended. It was him, but it wasn't him. The eyes were the same. Those deep whiskey-colored eyes that used to look at me with so much love it hurt. But everything else was destroyed. His face was a map of suffering. Deep lines carved into his skin by sun and wind. His beard was matted and gray. His lips were cracked and bleeding. He looked at me, and in his eyes I didn't see the arrogance of a thief. I didn't see the coldness of a man who abandons his child. I saw terror. Absolute primal terror. He pulled his arm away from me. He stumbled back, almost falling into the hydrangeas. He opened his mouth to speak. He tried to say something. His jaw moved. His throat worked. But no sound came out. Just a dry, raspy wheeze of air. He touched his throat. He looked at me with panic. And then he did something that broke me. He didn't fight. He didn't explain. He reached into the deep pocket of his filthy coat. His hand came out shaking uncontrollably. He wasn't holding a weapon. He wasn't holding money. He was holding a photograph. I looked at it. It was wet. It was crumpled. It was stained with dirt. But I could see the image clearly. It wasn't a photo of me. It was a photo of Sarah, our daughter. But it wasn't an old photo. It was a photo of her from yesterday, taken from a distance. Walking into the bridal shop, my blood ran cold. He hadn't just stumbled onto my porch by accident. He hadn't been passing by. He had been watching us. For how long? "What is this?" I whispered. "Why do you have this?" He pushed the photo into my hand. His fingers brushed against mine. His skin was ice cold. He stepped back again. His eyes darted to the street, then to the bushes, then to the sky, like he was expecting a sniper, like he was being hunted. He pointed at the photo. Then he pointed at me. And then he made a slashing motion across his throat. My heart stopped. He wasn't threatening me. He was warning me. He turned and tried to run, but his legs gave out. He collapsed onto the wet driveway. The plastic bag spilled open. Cans rolled across the pavement. I stood there, frozen, the photo in my hand, the man I hated at my feet, and the terrible realization that everything I thought I knew was a lie. The ambulance doors slammed shut. A heavy, metallic thud. It echoed in the quiet morning street. Then came the sirens, a rising wail that pierced the air. I stood in the driveway in my silk robe, shivering, not from the cold, but from the memory that sound unlocked. Red lights, blue lights, spinning against the wet pavement. They were the same colors as the neon sign outside our old apartment window, 20 years ago. The night the world stopped turning. The night I died, and this woman, this cold iron matriarch, was born. I closed my eyes. And suddenly, I wasn't standing in front of my mansion anymore. I was back there. The smell hit me first. Stale formula. Damp drywall. The lingering scent of the cheap cologne Elias used to wear. It was a Tuesday. I remember that because Tuesday was spaghetti night. I had cooked. I had set the table. I had waited. The clock on the wall ticked. Loud, relentless. 6 o'clock. 7 o'clock. 9 o'clock. The pasta went cold. The sauce congealed into a thick orange paste. Sarah was crying in her crib. A high, thin wail of hunger. I went to pick her up. I whispered. Daddy's just late. Daddy's working hard for us. Lies. I was already lying to her, and she was only 6 months old. At midnight, I knew. A wife always knows. It's a vibration in the air. A sudden emptiness in the house where a person should be. I walked into the bedroom. The closet door was open. Empty hangers rattled in the draft. His clothes were gone. His shoes were gone. His smell was fading. I ran to the kitchen, to the tin box where we kept the emergency cash, empty. I ran to the computer. I logged into our bank account. My hands were shaking so hard I mistyped the password 3 times. Finally, the screen loaded. The blue light of the monitor illuminated my face. Balance, $0. Savings, $0. Everything. Every cent we had saved for a house. Every dollar for Sarah's college. Every penny for groceries. Gone, and then I saw it. The note, it was sitting on the counter. Next to the cold spaghetti, a piece of torn notebook paper, anchored down by his wedding ring. The gold band looked dull in the kitchen light. I picked up the paper. It felt light. Too light to hold the weight of a life. I read it for words. Just for words scrawled in black ink. I never loved you. That was it. No apology. No explanation. Just a knife to the heart. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just slid down the kitchen cabinet until I hit the floor. I sat there on the cold linoleum, holding that piece of paper, while my daughter cried in the other room, and I felt something inside me snap, like a dry twig. The part of me that was soft died that night. The part of me that believed in love turned to ash. The years that followed were a blur of gray, the color of exhaustion. I remember the eviction notice 3 days later. Tape stuck to the front door. Red letters. Final warning. I remember packing our life into garbage bags. I remember the look on the landlord's face. Pity. I hated his pity more than I hated the cold. We moved into a basement studio. It smelled of mold and other people's cooking. I worked 3 jobs, waitress, cleaner, night shift at a gas station. My hands. These hands that now hold crystal glasses, They were raw. They were cracked from bleach and cheap soap. I remember the nights Sarah had a fever, burning up in my arms. I didn't have money for medicine. I sat in the bathroom with the shower running, creating steam, rocking her back and forth, praying to a God I no longer believed in. Please don't take her, I begged. He took everything else. Don't take her. And every time I felt weak, every time I wanted to give up, I thought of him, Elias. I pictured him on a beach somewhere, drinking cocktails with my money, laughing at us, living free while we drowned. And the rage would come. It wasn't a hot fire anymore. It was a cold, hard block of ice in my chest. It fueled me. It woke me up at 4 a.m. It kept me standing when my legs were shaking. I looked at my daughter sleeping on a mattress on the floor, and I made a vow. I will build a castle so high that no one can ever touch us again. I will have so much money that the world will have to respect us, and I will make him regret the day he was born. I worked. I saved. I invested. I fought. I clawed my way up from that basement. I started my own business. I crushed my competitors. I became ruthless. Because kindness was a weakness. Kindness was what got me left on a kitchen floor with $0. And I won. Look at me now. The matriarch. The owner of the biggest logistics firm in the state. The woman everyone fears. The woman everyone respects. I did it all without him. I did it to spite him. My hatred for him was the foundation of this house. My hatred was the mortar between every brick. But now, the memory faded. The sound of the ambulance siren drifted away into the distance. I opened my eyes. I was back on my porch. The sun was fully up now, glaring, unforgiving. The wet spot on the driveway where he had collapsed was starting to dry. But something was wrong. The hate that had fueled me for 20 years. It felt ... different. Heavy. Confusing because the man I had just seen. The man the paramedics loaded onto that stretcher ... He didn't look like a man who had been sipping cocktails on a beach. He didn't look like a thief living the high life. He looked like a man who had been to war. And lost. He looked starved. Not just hungry, starved, hollow, like his body had been eating itself for years. And that fear in his eyes. When he looked at the photo of Sarah, that wasn't the fear of getting caught. That was the fear of a father. A terrified father? Why? Why would the man who abandoned us carry a photo of our daughter? Why would he watch us from the shadows? And why? Why did he have no tongue? I looked down at my hands. They were still trembling. In my left hand, I was clutching the damp, dirty photo he had given me. But in my right hand, I was holding something else. The paramedic had handed it to me just before they closed the doors. "Ma'am," he had said, "he wanted you to have this. He wouldn't let go of it until I promised to give it to you." I opened my fist. It was a key, small brass, covered in rust. But it wasn't a house key, and it wasn't a car key. It had a number stamped into the metal, 404, and a logo I recognized instantly. The logo of the Greyhound bus station downtown. The place where people go when they have nowhere else to go. The place where secrets are kept in metal lockers for 25 cents a day. I stared at the key. It felt hot in my palm, like it was burning me, just like the curling iron had burned him all those years ago. My stomach twisted, a sick feeling rising in my throat. Part of me wanted to throw the key into the bushes, to go back inside, to finish my coffee, to get ready for the wedding, to pretend none of this happened, but I couldn't, 'cause of the look in his eyes, and because of the 4 words he had written on that note 20 years ago. I never loved you. Looking at this rusty key, for the first time in 2 decades, I wondered if that note was a lie. And if it was, then what was the truth? I gripped the key tighter, until the metal bit into my skin. I had to know, even if it destroyed me all over again. I walked to my car. I didn't change out of my robe. I didn't check my makeup. I just drove. Toward the station. Toward the truth. Toward locker 404. The key turned in the lock with a gritty metal scrape. Locker 404. The door swung open on rusty hinges, groaning in the quiet bus station. The smell drifted out instantly. It wasn't the smell of dirty clothes or rotting food. It was the smell of old paper, dust, and lavender. My heart skipped a beat. Lavender? That was the detergent I used. The expensive, imported kind I had used for 20 years. Why did a locker in a filthy bus station smell like my laundry room? I reached inside. The metal box was almost empty. There was no money, no stolen jewelry, no evidence of a millionaire lifestyle. There was only one thing: a stack of spiral-bound notebooks. Cheap drugstore notebooks with wire bindings that were bent and rusted. There were dozens of them, stacked neatly. Chronological order. I pulled the top one out. The cover was stained with grease, but the writing on the front was clear. It was Elias's handwriting. That jagged architectural scrawl I used to love. The date on the cover was from 2 weeks ago. I opened it, and the ground beneath my feet disappeared. It wasn't a diary of his thoughts. It wasn't a manifesto of hate. It was a log, a surveillance log. 7 a.m., Sarah leaves for the bridal shop. She looks tired, drinking green tea. 8:15 a.m., Matriarch leaves for the office, wearing the gray blazer. The rear tire on her Mercedes looks low. Must check. 6:30 p.m., lights out in the living room. They are safe. My hands began to tremble. The pages rattled in the quiet station. He hadn't been on a beach. He hadn't been in another country. He had been here, watching us, guarding us. And then a memory flashed in my mind, sharp, vivid, violent. I closed the notebook and leaned my head against the cold metal lockers. "Oh God," I whispered, because I remembered. I had seen him 2 weeks ago. I just hadn't looked close enough. The rain was hammering against the windshield of my car. It was a dark, bruised, purple evening. I was parked across the street from my warehouse. I was waiting for a client who was late, and I saw him. A figure in a heavy, oversized coat, limping through the puddles. I didn't know it was Elias then. To me, it was just a vagrant, a nuisance, someone who might break a window or steal copper wire. I locked my doors. The click echoed in the luxury silence of my car. I watched him, suspicious, angry. "Go away," I muttered to myself. "Don't you dare come near my building." But he didn't come near the building. He didn't check the locks. He didn't look for a way in. He walked past the dumpsters. He walked past the loading dock where the workers smoked. He stopped at the corner, under the flickering yellow light of a street lamp. He stood there, shoulders hunched against the freezing rain, and he waited. I watched him for 20 minutes. My client was late, so I had nothing else to do but stare at this miserable creature. I expected him to pull out a bottle. That's what they always did, right? Cheap vodka to numb the cold. But he didn't. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a plastic cup, a bright red cup from a fast food chain, and he started to beg. But it wasn't normal begging. He didn't harass people. He didn't shout. He just held the cup out to the few pedestrians rushing by. I watched a man in a suit drop a quarter in the cup. Elias bowed his head, a deep, respectful bow. Then he did something strange. He took the quarter out of the cup. He held it up to the streetlight. He inspected it. Then he put it in his other pocket. A minute later, a woman dropped a dollar bill. Elias shook his head. He tried to give it back. The woman looked confused, pushed it at him, and walked away. He looked at the bill like it was trash. He crumbled it up and shoved it deep into his coat, almost angrily. He went back to holding the cup, waiting for silver. Only silver. "What are you doing?" I whispered to the glass. The curiosity itched under my skin. Why would a starving man refuse paper money? Why was he hunting for coins? I started the engine. The vibration of the car hummed through my seat. I decided to follow him. Not to help him, but to make sure he left my neighborhood. He started to walk, dragging that left leg, step, drag, step, drag. He walked 4 blocks. Away from the warehouse district, away from the shelters, He walked toward the old industrial bridge, the place where the city forgot to sweep the streets. There was a phone booth there, a relic, one of the last working payphones in the city. It stood alone on the corner, covered in graffiti and bird droppings. The glass was smashed. The cord was frayed. Elias walked straight to it. He didn't look around. He stepped into the booth like it was a sanctuary. I pulled my car to the curb. I turned off the headlights. I rolled down the window just an inch. The sound of the rain filled the car. I watched him. He took out the quarters he had collected. He counted them. 1, 2, 3, 75 cents. He fed them into the slot. Clink, clink, clink. He picked up the receiver. He dialed a number. He didn't look at a piece of paper. He knew it by heart. I held my breath. Who calls someone from a payphone in 2024? A drug dealer. A fence for stolen goods. He waited. 1 ring. 2 rings. Then someone picked up. I saw his posture change. He straightened up. He pressed the receiver against his ear so hard his knuckles turned white. He didn't speak. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask for money. He just ... listened. He closed his eyes. I saw his chest rise and fall. A tear, a single glistening tear ... rolled down his dirty cheek. It caught the yellow light of the street lamp. 10 seconds. That was it. Just 10 seconds of silence. Then he slowly hung up the phone. He didn't slam it. He placed it back on the hook gently, like he was saying goodbye to a lover. He stepped out of the booth. He looked exhausted, but he also looked ... relieved, like he had just received a drug he needed to survive. I snapped the notebook shut. The echo of that memory slammed into me. I stood in the bus station, gasping for air. It was him. I had watched my husband begging for quarters in the rain. I had watched him refuse dollars because the payphone only took coins. I had watched him call someone every day for 20 years. Who? Who was on the other end of that line? He couldn't speak. I knew that now. He had no tongue. So he wasn't calling to talk. He was calling to listen, to hear a voice. Whose voice? Was it a woman? Was he calling the person he ran away with? Was he calling the person who did this to him? I looked at the notebook again. I flipped to the back page. There were numbers, columns of numbers, dates, times, and amounts. And at the bottom of the page, a receipt, tape gunned to the paper. It was a receipt for a wire transfer. Western Union recipient, anonymous. Location, Zurich, Switzerland. Amount, $500,000. Date, October 14th, 2004. My blood stopped moving. October 14th, 2004. That was the day he left. That was the day the bank accounts went to zero. He didn't spend the money. He sent it, every single penny. He sent it away the same day he disappeared. To Switzerland. Why? To hide it. No, next to the receipt there was a single word written in red ink. Deep, angry strokes. Insurance. I dropped the notebook. It hit the metal floor with a flat smack. Insurance? Insurance for what? For who? I looked at the phone booth number scrawled in the margin of the page. The number he called every day. It wasn't a Swiss number. It was a local number. A number I recognized. A number that made my knees buckle. It was the landline of my parents' old house. The house where Sarah spent her weekends when she was a baby. The house that had been empty for 10 years since my parents died. Or so I thought. I grabbed the keys to my car. I ran out of the bus station. I didn't care about the speed limit. I didn't care about the wedding rehearsal. I had to go to that house. I had to know who picked up that phone. And I had to know what kind of insurance costs $500,000. And a man's tongue? I started the engine. The engine roared, like a beast waking up. I was coming for the truth, Elias, and God help anyone who stood in my way. The Mercedes tore through the wet streets. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel. Knuckles white. My heart was a drum against my ribs. I didn't go to the empty house. Not yet. I needed him. I needed the man who sent the money. I needed the ghost who had been watching us. I spun the car around, tires screeching on the asphalt. I headed back to the bridge, back to the shadows, back to the filth. I parked the car at an angle, blocking the exit of the alleyway. The engine ticked as it cooled, the only sound in the dead end. I stepped out. My heels sank into the mud. I ruined my shoes. $400 Italian leather. Ruined in seconds. I didn't care. The air here was thick. It tasted of diesel fumes and rotting garbage. The smell of poverty. I walked deeper into the alley. The shadows were long. Rats skittered behind the dumpsters. But I wasn't afraid of rats. I was the predator here, Elias. My voice echoed off the brick walls. It wasn't a question. It was a command. I saw movement behind a stack of pallets. A flash of that dirty gray coat. He was there. He tried to hide, like a child playing hide and seek. But this wasn't a game. Come out. I screamed. I know about the money. I know about Zurich. The pallets shifted. Right. He bolted. He tried to run toward the fence at the end of the alley. It was pathetic. His left leg dragged through the puddles. Splash. Drag. Splash. He was so slow. So weak. He stumbled over a trash bag and hit the ground hard. I heard the air leave his lungs. A wet, painful wheeze. I was on him in seconds. I grabbed the collar of his coat. The wool was soaked and heavy. I hauled him up. I slammed him against the brick wall. He didn't fight back. He hung there in my grip, limp, defeated, his head lolled to the side. Rainwater dripped from his matted hair onto my face. I didn't wipe it away. I stared into his eyes. Those whiskey-colored eyes. But the light in them was gone. They were dull, glassy, filled with a panic so raw it almost made me let go. But I didn't let go. I tightened my grip. I felt the thin bones of his shoulders through the layers of filth. Talk to me. I hissed. I was close enough to smell his breath. It didn't smell like alcohol. It smelled like hunger. It smelled like sickness. Where did you get $500,000, Elias? I shook him. His head snapped back and forth. You left us with nothing. You let Sarah go hungry. You let me beg for diapers. And you had $500,000 in a Swiss bank account? Who are you working for? Answer me. He looked at me. His chest heaved. Tears welled up in his eyes. They cut clean tracks through the dirt on his face. He raised his hands. Surrender. He was trying to tell me something. He pointed to his throat again, just like he did on the porch. He shook his head violently, desperately. I don't care about your excuses. I screamed. My voice cracked. The tears were coming now. Hot tears of rage. Speak, you coward. Speak to your wife. Tell me why you did it. Tell me why you ruined my life. He closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. A shudder ran through his entire body. And then he opened his mouth. He leaned forward into the light, and he opened it wide. I stopped screaming. The breath vanished from my lungs. The sound of the rain faded away, because there was nothing there. No tongue, just a stump. A jagged, scarred stump of pink flesh, buried deep in the back of his throat. It wasn't a surgical cut. It wasn't clean. It was ragged, uneven, like it had been ... taken, ripped out, or burned out. Decades of scar tissue, white and shiny against the red. I let go of his collar. I stumbled back. My heel caught on a stone. I almost fell. I covered my mouth with my hand, trying to hold back the bile rising in my throat. Oh my God, I whispered. Elias ... He wasn't silent because he was ashamed. He wasn't silent because he was hiding. He was silent because he had been mutilated. He couldn't speak. He couldn't tell me the truth. He couldn't defend himself. For 20 years, he had been trapped in a prison of silence. Screaming without a voice, he slumped against the wall, sliding down until he hit the wet pavement. He coughed. A harsh, barking sound. He looked at me with those sad, broken eyes. He didn't look angry. He looked worried. He reached into his coat again. Not the pocket where he kept the receipts. The inner pocket. Over his heart. He pulled out a photo. It wasn't the photo of Sarah from the bridal shop. It was an old photo. A photo from before. A photo of Sarah when she was a baby. The day we brought her home from the hospital. She was wrapped in a pink blanket, sleeping, and on the back of the photo, there was writing, scrawled in shaky dark ink. Recently written. The ink was still slightly smudged. He held it out to me. His hand was trembling so hard the paper shook like a leaf. I looked at the writing for words, just like the note he left 20 years ago. But these 4 words were different. These 4 words changed everything. Is she safe yet? I looked up at him. Is she safe yet? I read aloud. He nodded, frantic, desperate. He pointed at the photo. Then he pointed at the sky. Then he made a circle with his hands. A circle around his head. A crown? No. A halo? No. He did it again. He traced the air. A shape. A specific shape. A star. He traced a star in the air. The same shape as the scar on his neck. The same shape as the mark I caused so long ago. But this time, he pointed to the photo of Sarah, and he pointed to her neck. In the photo, I looked closer at the picture. My baby girl, sleeping. But there was a shadow on her neck, a birthmark. No, I remembered. I remembered the day she was born. The doctor had mentioned a mark. A small star-shaped pigmentation. It will fade, he had said. And it did. By the time she was 2, it was gone. Invisible. Why was Elias pointing at it? Why was he obsessed with a birthmark that vanished 20 years ago? He grabbed my ankle. His grip was weak, but his eyes were burning. He mouthed a word. I could not hear it. But I saw the shape of his lips. Blood. He mouthed it again. Blood. Is she safe yet? The question hammered in my brain. Safe from what? Safe from poverty. Yes, safe from him. Yes, but he was not asking about that. He was asking about something else. He was asking about the insurance. He was asking about the reason he lost his voice. He was asking about the reason he lived in the mud for 2 decades, watching, waiting, making, sure she was safe. I looked at the broken man at my feet, the man I had spent a lifetime hating, and I realized the terrible truth. He had not left me because he stopped loving me. He had not left me because he was weak. He had left me because he was paying a ransom that never ended. I knelt down in the mud, my expensive dress soaking up the filth. I did not care. I grabbed his shoulders. Elias, I whispered, who has her blood? He did not answer. He could not. He just pointed, past me, past the alley, toward the city's skyline, toward the tallest building in the center, the medical research tower, the headquarters of the Genetics One Corporation, the company that my heart stopped, the company that my daughter's fiancé worked for. I stood up. The world spun. The pieces slammed together. The money to Switzerland, the missing voice, the surveillance, the insurance. And now, the wedding. My daughter was not just marrying a rich man. She was walking into a trap. And the man at my feet was the only one who knew. I looked at the photo again. Is she safe yet? No, I whispered. She isn't. I reached down. Get up, I said. Get up, Elias. We are going to the wedding, and we are going to burn it down. He did not make it to the car. One moment I was dragging him toward the Mercedes, toward the truth. The next moment, he was dead weight. He collapsed into the mud with a wet, heavy thud. No groan, no cry. Just the terrifying silence of a body shutting down. Elias, I dropped to my knees. The mud soaked through my dress immediately. I did not care. I slapped his face. His skin was gray, like ash. His eyes were rolled back in his head. Do not dare, I screamed. Do not dare die on me now. I needed him. I needed him to explain the star. I needed him to explain the blood. But his chest was not moving. I fumbled for my phone. My hands were slick with rain and grime. I dialed 911. Ambulance, I barked. Industrial District. Alley off 4th Street now. I pressed my fingers to his neck. The pulse was there, but it was faint. A fluttering bird trapped in a cage. Thump, thump, silence, thump. I leaned over him, shielding his face from the rain with my body. For the first time in 20 years, I was not the matriarch. I was not the CEO. I was just a wife. Terrified that she was about to become a widow. The sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder, cutting through the storm. I tried to loosen his coat, to help him breathe. The buttons were missing. The fabric was stiff with years of dirt. I pulled the collar open, and that is when I saw it. Something glinted against his pale skin. Not the scar. Something else. A string. A dirty shoelace string tied around his neck, hidden beneath the layers of wool and filth, and hanging from it. A key. It was not like the key to the bus station locker I had opened before. This one was different. It was silver, heavy, intricate. It looked medical, like the key to a hazardous materials cabinet or a high-security vault. There was a tag attached to it, a small plastic tag, written in permanent marker that had faded to a pale blue. Locker B12, Mercy General Hospital. The ambulance screeched to a halt at the mouth of the alley. Red lights washed over us. Paramedics jumped out, boots splashing in the puddles. "Step back, ma'am." They pushed me away. They swarmed him, cutting his coat, checking his vitals. "Severe condition," one shouted. "Hypothermia, heart rate is dropping." They loaded him onto the gurney. They strapped him down. I tried to follow. "I am his wife." I shouted, "I am coming with him." "There is no room, ma'am." "Follow us to Mercy General." The doors slammed shut. The ambulance sped away, leaving me alone in the dark alley, with the rain, and the mud, and the silver key I had snatched from his neck in the chaos. The monster who had eaten her father alive. I wiped the tears from my face. I smoothed my ruined dress. The matriarch was back. But this time, I wasn't fighting for money. I was fighting for blood. I walked out of the basement, leaving the door to locker B12 wide open. I didn't need to hide the truth anymore. I was going to bring it to the church, and I was going to serve it cold. I sat on the cold linoleum floor of the hospital basement. The hum of the industrial freezers buzzed in my ears. A low, maddening drone, like a swarm of bees trapped behind the walls. My hands were still shaking. The file lay open in my lap. The paper was yellowed at the edges, brittle. It smelled of dust and secrets. I ran my finger over the diagnosis. The ink was faded, but the letters were sharp. Hemolytic genetic failure. I had never heard of it. I had never seen those words in a parenting book. But I read the description below, and my blood ran cold. A dormant genetic anomaly. Triggers at 6 months of age. Causes gradual crystallization of the blood. Painful, degenerative. 100%. Fatal without enzyme replacement. 6 months. I closed my eyes. The memory hit me like a physical blow. Sarah at 6 months. The crying. The endless screaming crying. The doctors told me it was colic. They told me she was just a difficult baby. I remembered walking the floor with her for hours, thinking I was a bad mother, thinking I was doing something wrong. But she wasn't difficult. She was dying. She was in agony. Her blood was turning to glass inside her veins, and I didn't know. But he knew. Elias knew. I turned the page. My breath hitched. There was a consent form, dated the day before he disappeared. It wasn't a standard hospital form. It was typed on plain paper. No letterhead. No legal jargon. Just a terrifying contract between a desperate father and a monster. I, Elias Miller, acknowledge that the treatment is experimental. I acknowledge that the enzyme is unapproved by the FDA. Acknowledged that the sourcing of the biological material is illegal. I agreed to full confidentiality, punishment for breach of contract, immediate cessation of treatment. I stared at the signature at the bottom. Elias's signature. It was shaky, jagged, like he had signed it while weeping, or while a gun was pointed at his head. Immediate cessation of treatment. That meant death. If he talked, Sarah died. If he was caught, Sarah died. If he missed a payment, Sarah died. I looked at the wall of lockers. Suddenly, the last 20 years made a terrible, twisted sense. I had always wondered why he didn't fight for custody, why he didn't try to clear his name, why he let me paint him as the villain to the whole world. Because he had to. He needed to be the villain. He needed to be the thief. Because if the authorities looked at the money, if the police investigated where the cash went, they wouldn't just find a thief. They would find the illegal clinic. They would find the black market doctor. And they would shut it down. They would confiscate the medicine. And Sarah would be dead in a week. He didn't leave to save himself. He left to become a ghost. To become untraceable. So that no one could follow the money back to our daughter's veins. And the most painful part? The part that made me gasp for air in that freezing basement. He knew me. He knew his wife. I was the rule follower. I was the moral compass. If he had come to me, if he had told me we need to steal money to pay a criminal doctor to inject our baby with illegal enzymes, ... I would have panicked. I would have said no. I would have said it was too dangerous. I would have tried to find a legal way. And while I was searching for a legal way, Sarah would have died. He knew that. He knew he had to do the dirty work alone. To protect Sarah's life and to protect my conscience, I looked back at the file. There were notes, handwritten notes in the margins, in a different handwriting, sharp, clinical, arrogant, subject responding well to dosage for payment received, late applied penalty interest. Father attempted to negotiate, reminded him of the terms. Father offered collateral, accepted collateral. My stomach twisted. What collateral? I flipped through the receipts again. The amounts were staggering. 12,000, 20,000, 50,000. How? How did a man living on the street make this kind of money? I looked at the dates. There were gaps. Months where no money was deposited. And then a note from the doctor. Payment missed. Alternative compensation arranged. Alternative compensation. I remembered his tongue, the scar tissue, the missing teeth, the limp. He didn't just pay with cash. When he didn't have money, he paid with flesh. He let them take pieces of him. To keep the medicine flowing. To keep the subject alive, I felt a scream building in my chest. I wanted to tear this hospital down brick by brick. I wanted to burn the world. This wasn't just a tragedy. This was a harvest. They had harvested my husband slowly, year by year. And the man holding the knife, the man writing these notes, was Dr. Arthur Sterling, the man who was going to walk his son down the aisle tomorrow, the man who had toasted to family at the dinner last night. He wasn't saving Sarah. He was studying her. She was subject 894. She wasn't a patient. She was a lab rat. And Elias was the battery that kept the experiment running. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, like lead, but my mind was clear, sharp, dangerous. I grabbed the entire box. I wasn't leaving anything behind. I tucked the file under my arm. I marched out of the basement. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, but I didn't hear them anymore. I only heard one thing, the beating of my own heart, and the promise I was making to the man lying in the ER upstairs. He had carried this weight for 20 years. He had taken the blows. He had taken the silence. He had taken the shame. But his watch was over. The matriarch had the file now. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button for the ground floor. I checked my reflection in the polished metal doors. My dress was ruined. My hair was a mess. My eyes were red and swollen. But I looked ... powerful. Terrifyingly powerful. Because I had the weapon. I had the receipts. And I knew the secret. The elevator dinged. The doors opened. I stepped out into the lobby. I walked past the gift shop with the teddy bears and balloons. I walked past the security guard who looked at my muddy clothes with suspicion. I didn't stop. I walked out the automatic doors into the rain. The storm was raging. Thunder shook the ground. Good, let it storm. Let it wash away the lies. I threw the box into the passenger seat of my Mercedes. I gripped the steering wheel. My knuckles were white. I looked at the digital clock on the dashboard. 10 a.m. The wedding started at noon. 2 hours. I had 2 hours to rewrite history. I had 2 hours to save my daughter from marrying into a family of vampires. I started the engine. The car roared to life. I didn't drive home. I drove toward the church. But first, I had to make one stop. I had to pick up a guest who wasn't invited, a guest who couldn't speak, but whose presence would scream louder than any objection. I was going back for Elias, and we were going to crash the wedding of the century. The windshield wipers slashed across the glass, back and forth, like a metronome counting down the seconds of my daughter's freedom. I drove fast, too fast. The tires hissed against the wet asphalt. But my mind wasn't on the road. My mind was stuck inside that white banker's box sitting on the passenger seat. Specifically, on one document I had glanced at before leaving the basement. A document titled Indentured Service Agreement. I couldn't get the words out of my head. They were burned into my retinas. I had thought Elias was just paying money. I thought he was just a desperate father scraping together cash. But money runs out. Savings dry up. And when the money ran out, Dr. Sterling didn't stop the treatment. He offered a trade that makes the devil look like a saint. I reached over and touched the box. I could feel the cold radiating from it. The document detailed the terms of the debt. It wasn't a loan. It was a sale. Elias didn't just borrow money. He sold himself. He sold his body. He sold his identity. He sold his existence. I remembered the key. The rusty key to the bus station locker. Locker 404. I thought it was just a place he kept his surveillance notes. I was wrong. It was his workspace. According to the contract, Elias became a courier. A mule. For 20 years, the man I loved. The man who used to wear silk ties and design skyscrapers, was forced to carry backpacks filled with illegal medical waste, unregistered narcotics, black market enzymes. He shuttled them between the labs and the bus station. He was the invisible link in Sterling's criminal chain. He took the risk. He carried the weight. If the police caught him, he goes to prison as a homeless addict. Sterling stays clean. If the gangs rob him, he dies in an alley. Sterling loses nothing. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my leather gloves creaked. He was a slave in plain sight. That explains the limp. He wasn't just old. He had been beaten, likely by rival dealers, likely by Sterling's enforcers when a shipment was late. And the tongue. Oh God, the tongue. The contract had a clause for security breaches. Any attempt to communicate with law enforcement or the subject's guardians will result in immediate physical silencing. He must have tried. At some point, in the darkness of those 20 years, he must have tried to scream. He must have tried to tell someone. And Sterling. That monster in a tuxedo, He took his voice literally. He cut it out to make sure the mule could never testify. But why stay? Why not run? Why not take the abuse and just disappear to another state? Why stay in the same city, sleeping in the mud, watching us? Because of the final clause. The clause that made my blood turn to ice. I saw it at the bottom of the last page. Bold font, underlined, default protocol. It read, in the event of the courier's disappearance, death, or failure to perform duties, the assets subject 894 will be considered forfeit. Collection of the asset will be executed immediately to recover losses. Collection. They weren't talking about a car. They weren't talking about a house. They were talking about Sarah. If Elias stopped working, if Elias ran away, they wouldn't just stop the medicine. They would come for her. They would take her. Collection. What did that mean for a genetics company? Did it mean harvesting her organs? Did it mean turning her into a permanent lab rat locked in a basement somewhere? Or did it mean simply killing her to erase the evidence of their illegal experiments? Elias knew. He knew exactly what collection meant. And that terror, that absolute primal terror of his daughter being collected. That was the chain around his neck. That was what kept him in the alley. That was what kept him eating from garbage cans. That was what made him cut ties with the love of his life. He wasn't protecting himself from the law. He was standing guard. He was the human shield between our daughter and a monster who viewed her as property. Every time he begged for a quarter, every time he slept in the rain, he was paying her ransom. It's one day at a time. It's for 7,300 days. The hospital came into view, its red emergency sign glowing through the storm. I slammed on the brakes. The Mercedes skidded to a halt in the ambulance bay. I didn't wait for a valet. I left the car running, left the door open. I grabbed the box. I ran inside. The air in the ER was chaotic. Beeping monitors, shouting nurses, the smell of antiseptic and fear. I marched to the desk. Elias Miller, I demanded. The nurse looked up, annoyed. "Ma'am, you can't just my husband," I screamed, "the John Doe brought in from the alley." "Where is he?" My voice cracked the air. The room went silent. A doctor stepped forward. He looked tired. "Room 3, he said quietly. "But ma'am, he's critical. He's barely holding on." I didn't listen. I pushed past him. I ran to room 3. I threw open the curtain, and there he was, hooked up to machines, tubes in his nose. Wires on his chest, his skin was translucent. He looked so small, so fragile, like a bird that had flown into a window. I walked to the bed. I placed the box on the side table. I took his hand. It was rough, calloused, cold. "Elias," I whispered. He opened them. He opened them. Those whiskey eyes found mine. They were cloudy, fading, but he saw me. He saw the box. And he panicked. The monitor started to beep faster. Beep, beep, beep. He tried to pull his hand away. He tried to sit up. He was terrified. He thought I was angry. He thought I was going to turn him in. He thought he had failed. "No," I said. I squeezed his hand. Hard. "No, Elias. Stop." I leaned down. My tears dripped onto his face, mixing with the dirt he still hadn't washed off. "I know," I whispered. "I know about the mule. I know about the locker. I know about the tongue, and I know about the collection." He froze. He looked at me with wide disbelief. "You didn't leave me?" I sobbed. "You saved me. You saved her. You took the beating for both of us." He let out a breath, a long, shuddering sigh. A tear slid from the corner of his eye. He squeezed my hand back, weakly. Then he looked at the clock on the wall. 10:45 a.m. Panic returned to his eyes. He pointed at the clock. Then he pointed at the door. It made the shape of a church steeple with his trembling fingers. The wedding he was telling me to go, to stop it because he knew something I didn't. The wedding wasn't just a ceremony. The wedding was the collection. Marriage makes you next of kin. Marriage gives the husband medical power of attorney. If Sarah married Arthur Sterling's son, then the Sterling family would legally own her medical decisions. They wouldn't need Elias anymore. They wouldn't need his silence. They wouldn't need his money. Once the ring was on her finger, Sarah belonged to them. And Elias. Elias would be disposed of. "I know," I said. My voice hardened. The matriarch was back. But this time, she had armor. "I'm going there now. I'm going to stop it. But I'm not going alone." I looked at the nurse who had followed me in. "Get him a wheelchair," I ordered. "He can't leave." The nurse protested. "He's unstable." "I don't care if he's dead." I snarled. "He is her father. And he has paid for this wedding with his own blood. He is going to be there. Get the chair." The nurse ran. I looked back at Elias. Can you do this? I asked, can you stand one more time? For her? He nodded. Slowly, painfully, but with a fire in his eyes that I hadn't seen in 20 years. It was the fire of a father protecting his child. Good, I said. I reached into the box. I pulled out the file, because we're going to burn Dr. Sterling to the ground. And I want you to watch him burn. I unhooked the monitors. The alarm screamed. I didn't care. I wrapped him in a hospital blanket. I lifted him up. He weighed nothing. We walked out of that room, the matriarch and the ghost, heading to the church. To deliver the final objection, the church bells began to ring, deep, resonant, boom, boom. They didn't sound like wedding bells to me. They sounded like a countdown. I steered the Mercedes onto the gravel driveway of the cathedral. The tires crunched loudly. Breaking the polite silence of the ceremony, the valet stepped forward. A young boy in a crisp red vest. He opened my door with a professional smile. Then he looked into the passenger seat, and the smile died. He took a step back, his nose wrinkled, cause the smell of the alley, the smell of sickness and rot, was pouring out of my luxury car, ma'am. The valet stammered, "You can't park here? The ceremony has already started." I ignored him. I walked to the trunk. I pulled out the wheelchair I had stolen from the hospital. I unfolded it. Snap. "Help me," I ordered. The boy hesitated. Now I screamed. He scrambled to help me lift Elias out of the car. Elias was shaking. Not from the cold, from the terror. He looked at the church doors. Massive. Wooden, closed. He knew who was inside. He knew the monster was waiting at the altar. And he knew his daughter was walking toward the trap. I tucked the hospital blanket around his legs. I covered the mud on his feet. I couldn't cover the bruises on his face. I couldn't cover the sunken cheeks. I couldn't give him back his tongue, but I could give him his dignity. I knelt in front of him, right there on the gravel. I took his face in my hands. "Listen to me," I whispered. "The debt is over." He looked at me, confused. "You paid it for 20 years, I said. "You paid it with your body. You paid it with your voice. But today, the bill is settled. Sterling doesn't own you anymore. And he doesn't own her. I'm taking the debt now. I'm paying it with fire." Tears welled in his eyes. He nodded. Small, brave nod. I stood up. I grabbed the handles of the wheelchair. I took a deep breath. The matriarch, the warrior, and the ghost. We moved toward the doors. The valet stared. The security guards at the entrance stepped forward. "Ma'am, you're not on the list. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down." Looked the guard in the eye. "I'm the mother of the bride," I hissed. "Touch me and I will buy your security firm just to fire you." He stepped back. Fear is a universal language. And I was fluent. I pushed the doors open. Both of them. Slam. They hit the back walls with a thunderous crash. The sound echoed through the vaulted ceiling. The organ music cut out instantly. The choir stopped singing. 500 heads turned. 500 wealthy, powerful people in silk and diamonds, staring at the back of the church, staring at us. The silence was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating. And in that silence, we walked. Squeak, squeak. The wheels of the hospital chair were the only sound in the room. I pushed him down the center aisle, past the pews, past the judgmental whispers. "Who is that? Is that a homeless man? Oh my God, the smell." I didn't look at them. I looked straight ahead, at the altar, where my daughter stood. Sarah. She looked breathtaking. Her dress was white lace. Her hair was pinned up with pearls. She looked like a princess. But her face was a mask of horror. She turned, she saw me, and then she saw him. It's the man in the wheelchair. The man in the filthy coat. It's the man she had been taught to hate since she was a baby. Her eyes went wide. Her hands flew to her mouth. She didn't see a savior. She saw a nightmare. She saw the monster who abandoned her. "Mom," she whispered. The word carried in the acoustic perfection of the church. "Mom, what are you doing? Why is he here? Get him out." Get him out of my wedding. Her voice rose to a scream, hysterical. "Ashamed he left us," she cried. "He's trash. Get him out." Elias flinched. Every word was a knife. He hunched over in the chair, trying to make himself smaller, trying to disappear. He accepted her hate. He had accepted it for 20 years. It was part of the deal. But I wouldn't accept it. Not for 1 second longer. I stopped the wheelchair. Right in the center of the aisle, 10 feet from the altar. I looked at the groom, Arthur Sterling's son. He looked confused. But then I looked at the father of the groom, Dr. Arthur Sterling, standing next to the priest. His smile was gone. His face was pale. He was staring at Elias. He was staring at the mule who was supposed to be dead. He was staring at the loose end he forgot to cut. Our eyes met, and he knew. He saw the white banker's box tucked under my arm. He saw the file in my hand. He knew the game was over. "No, Sarah," I said. My voice was calm, cold, deadly. "He is not leaving. And there will be no wedding." Sarah stepped down from the altar, her dress rustling. "Mom, you're ruining everything. You're crazy. You told me he didn't love us. You told me he stole our money." I walked past the wheelchair. I walked up the steps to the altar. I stood between my daughter and the Sterling family. I held up the file. "I lied," I said. "I lied because I didn't know. But he, ... Okay, I pointed back at Elias, at the broken man weeping silently in the aisle. "He didn't lie. He didn't steal. He paid." I turned to Dr. Sterling. "Didn't he, doctor? Tell her. Tell her how much her life cost. Tell her what you took from him. Or should I show her the receipts?" Sterling lunged. "Security," he shouted. "Get this woman out. She's hysterical." But it was too late. I opened the file. I pulled out the photo. The photo of Sarah as a baby, with the star-shaped birthmark. And I pulled out the receipt for the collection. "Sure," I said. "Look at his neck. Look at your father's neck." Sarah froze. She looked at Elias. She saw the scar. The star-shaped burn. "He bears the mark," I whispered, "so you wouldn't have to. He isn't a guest, Sarah. He is the sacrifice." And then I threw the receipts into the air. Hundreds of them. They fluttered down like snow inside the cathedral, covering the altar, covering the groom, and landing at the feet of the man who had no tongue to defend himself. The chaos in the church was deafening. Police sirens, shouting guests, the sound of Dr. Sterling screaming as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists. But I didn't hear any of it. I was in the back of another ambulance, holding the hand of the man who had saved us all. Sarah was there too. She was kneeling on the metal floor of the vehicle. Her white wedding dress was stained with the mud from his boots. She was weeping, broken, guttural sobs that shook her entire body. "I'm sorry," she kept whispering. "I'm so sorry, Daddy." She held his other hand against her cheek, desperate to warm him, desperate to undo 20 years of hatred in 20 minutes. Elias looked at her. His eyes were no longer terrified. They were peaceful. The panic was gone. The burden was gone. He had completed the mission. He had delivered the package. The asset was safe. He tried to smile. The skin around his eyes crinkled. He squeezed her hand once, twice, and then his grip went slack. The monitor above his head let out a long, high-pitched tone. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The paramedic reached over. He turned off the machine. The silence that followed was heavier than the church doors. "Time of death," the paramedic whispered. 12:45 p.m. Elias was gone. The ghost had finally faded. He didn't die in a mansion. He didn't die surrounded by wealth. He died in a moving ambulance, wearing a stolen hospital blanket. But he died looking at the face of the daughter he had purchased with his life. I stared at his chest. Still, I waited for it to rise again. But it didn't. The rain hammered against the roof of the ambulance. A drum roll for a fallen soldier. I felt a numbness spreading through my limbs. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake him. I wanted to tell him it wasn't fair. He didn't get to see the victory. He didn't get to eat a warm meal. He didn't get to sleep in a soft bed. He just ... ended. The ambulance arrived at the hospital. They wheeled him away. Not to a room, but to the morgue. Sarah collapsed into a chair in the waiting room, still wearing her wedding dress, now a widow of her own childhood. I stood by the window, watching the storm tear the city apart. I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out my insides with a spoon. "Ma'am?" A voice broke my trance. I turned. It was the nurse, the one who had helped me steal him earlier. Her eyes were red. She was holding something. A plastic biohazard bag. Inside there was a piece of paper, folded into a tiny square, wrapped in plastic wrap to keep it dry. "We found this," she said softly, sewn into the lining of his coat, right over his heart. I took the bag. My fingers trembled as I opened it. The smell of the alley drifted out. Tobacco, rain, and him. I unfolded the paper. It was soft, worn thin at the creases. It had been folded and unfolded 1,000 times. The handwriting was old, from before the tremors started, from before the nerve damage. It was dated October 14th, 2004, the day he left, the day he died the first time. I read the first line, and my knees gave out. I sank to the floor of the waiting room, ignoring the people staring. "To my beloved wife," it began. "If you are reading this, then I have failed to return. Or perhaps I have succeeded. I know you hate me right now. I know you are cursing my name. Good. Hold on to that hate. Let it burn you. Let it make you strong. 'Cause if you love me, you will look for me. And if you look for me, ... they will find her." I couldn't breathe. The tears fell onto the paper, blurring the ink. He had engineered my hatred. He had designed it. He knew that a heartbroken wife waits, but a hateful wife moves on. A hateful wife builds walls. A hateful wife protects her cub. He made me hate him to make me strong enough to survive without him. I read on. I spoke to the doctor today. The price is high, higher than money. But looking at Sarah sleeping in her crib, it is a bargain. Cannot tell you. You are too good. You would try to fight them legally? And the law cannot save her blood, so I must go into the dark. The letter ended with a paragraph that shattered my soul. Do not pity me. I am not a victim. I am a father. And a father's job is not to be seen. It is to be the foundation. I chose to be a ghost so she could be a bride. Being hated by you was the only way to keep you both alive. Tell her I loved her every day, even the days I couldn't speak it. And tell yourself, Kay, that you were the love of my life, even when I was sleeping in the rain. I pressed the letter to my chest. I curled into a ball on the hospital floor, and I let out a scream that had been building for 20 years. It wasn't a scream of anger. It was a scream of pure, agonizing love. He had won. He had beaten them all. He had played the longest, hardest game in history, and he had won. Sarah was alive. Sterling was in chains, and the truth was finally out of the shadows. But the cost was the man I should have grown old with. I looked up at Sarah. She was watching me. She saw the letter. She crawled over to me. We sat there. Two women in ruined, expensive clothes, holding a piece of dirty paper. And for the first time, we weren't alone. His love filled the room, heavier than the grief, stronger than the death. He was gone, but his will, the matriarch's will, was just beginning, because now I had work to do. I had to make sure the world never forgot the name Elias Miller, and I had to make sure that Dr. Sterling never saw the sun again. The rain finally stopped on the day of the funeral. The sky cleared. A cold, sharp blue that hurt to look at. We buried him on a hill. Overlooking the city, he had walked as a ghost for 20 years. It wasn't a small service. I made sure of that. There were no secrets anymore. I had gathered everyone. My business partners. Sarah's friends. Even the press. I stood at the podium. My black dress moved in the wind. I looked at the sea of faces, and I told them the truth. I didn't tell them about the successful architect who died young. I told them about the beggar. I told them about the mule. I told them about the man who sold his voice to buy a life. You see a grave, I said. I see a receipt paid in full. Sarah stood next to the coffin. She wasn't wearing black. She was wearing his old gray coat. She had cleaned it. She had sewn the buttons back on. She refused to take it off. She touched the cold mahogany wood. She didn't cry. She looked fierce. She looked like him. I hated him for 20 years, she whispered to the crowd. I cursed his name every night before I went to sleep. And while I was cursing him, he was freezing to death so I could wake up. She looked up, her eyes burning with a new understanding. My life isn't mine, she said. My life is his legacy. And I will not waste a single second of it. After the crowd left, I stayed. Just me and the fresh dirt. The smell of wet earth and lilies filled the air. I sat on the grass. I didn't care about the mud anymore. I looked at the headstone. I had chosen the inscription myself. Just 3 words. Elias Miller. The foundation, because that's what he was. For 2 decades, I thought I was the one building our family. I thought I was the strong one. I thought I was the architect of our survival. I built the company. I built the mansion. I built the reputation. But I was just building the decoration. I was the skyscraper reaching for the sun. But a skyscraper cannot stand without a foundation buried deep in the dark. He was the concrete. He was the steel in the ground, silent, invisible, bearing the weight of the entire world on his broken shoulders. Without him, I would have crumbled. Without him, Sarah would be dust. I reached out and touched the stone. It was cold, but my heart felt warm. For the first time in 20 years, the knot of anger in my chest was gone. The hate was gone. The confusion was gone. There was only gratitude, a quiet, immense gratitude. You can rest now, Elias, I whispered to the wind. The shift is over. You don't have to watch from the shadows anymore. We are safe, and this time, I will be the one keeping watch. I stood up. I smoothed my dress. I took one last look at the city below. The